Okay, everybody. Glad that you're on here today. And I want to just introduce myself to you and tell you a little bit about why I wanted to put this together for everyone. So my name is Stephanie Richardson, and I am a certified coach, speaker, and trainer with the John Maxwell team. And I had the privilege of attending John Maxwell's conference that he does for his team, and that was last week. And after attending that, I felt just my heart was calling me to think about how can I facilitate some good discussion around the topics that are on everyone's minds right now. And so I wanted us to just be a resource to each other, to just have a safe place to process and talk about how to lead through this big challenge that we are all faced with right now. And just for everyone to be able to share their thoughts and ideas about that. And so this is not about me sharing a lot of new information with you or anything like that. Really, the whole nuts and bolts of what we're going to be doing is processing the questions that you saw in your workbook. Hey, Karen, glad you're on here. Hey, Jill, glad you're back. And you can hear me this time.
Yes.
Awesome. Hey, Karen, glad you're here.
Me too.
So the discussion is really going to be around the workbook pages and really just getting your thoughts around that each day and just giving everybody a place to really process all of this information and come up with a game plan and just to help us think about, okay, how are we going to handle this as leaders? And, you know, John defines a leader as anyone who influences anyone else, whether you lead a team or not. You lead a family, you lead somewhere in your life, right? And so let's just get started and jump right in. And then I have some closing questions for you too after the workbook to really just help us think about, okay, what are our next steps? What do we want to do next? So let's start with what our goal is today. So the goal of this first session is really just to learn what a crisis is and to help us take a different perspective on everything that's going on. So let's start with the first question. Why do you think a crisis makes it easier to distinguish between good and bad leaders?
Well, I would say can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. Like he talks about, everything is magnified. If it's good, it's going to get better. If it's bad, if it was maybe already not going well, it's going to amplify that as well. So things just become more obvious. There's less sort of mediocrity, status quo floating that's going to happen.
Well,
Absolutely.
And he said it happens faster as well. It's more evident quicker.
Yeah. For the on the downhill side of things,
yes.
like if you're already having problems, those are going to become bigger problems and faster and more amplified, which I thought was interesting, because on the good side of things, we're kind of, like he says, steadiness, perseverance, trying to stay, keep everything just sort of there. So it's not necessarily going to mean the good stuff that was happening is going to also go crazy and be, we don't want to have that expectation that that's going to go crazy in that direction. But definitely, I think it makes sense that the stuff that was not good is going to be more noticeable.
Yeah, you're right. He said sometimes the leader just holds everything steady, right?
Mm-hmm.
What else? Anyone else have thoughts on that question and why you think a crisis makes it easier to distinguish between good and bad leaders? Any other thoughts?
Well, I think at times of crisis, we fall back on the basics. So if a good leader has a solid basis there, that's going to bring itself out. So you have, hopefully as a leader, we have our systems and we know our values and we know the things that we need to do. And so in crisis, when we fall back on them, they're solid.
Yes. You remember the author Roy Vaden, and he always talks about a business is only as strong as the systems that it has in place, right?
Absolutely. Mhm.
And so it's those small good decisions that we make every single day with those systems that we have in place that are going to, on the end of this, pay off. But you have to have those systems in place, and you can't be flying by the seat of your pants.
Right.
Or then you have one of those situations where Jill was talking about where everything just kind of goes downhill because there are no systems to keep you grounded, right? Absolutely, Sally. Anybody else have thoughts on that question?
Well, he talked about being realistic and telling the truth as you know it or
Mhm.
as you understand it, and
Mhm.
being willing to say you don't know something,
Mm-hmm.
or say you're not sure if this is going to turn out right, and then accept whatever the decision was or the outcome of that decision was, and then move on from there and not let that pull you back down as well.
Right, to be authentic, right?
Mm-hmm.
As a leader. All right, good
Well,
discussion.
it's
Any
sort
other?
of, well,
Go
something
ahead.
like that just came to mind, I think, because it's always important to be authentic as a good leader.
Right.
But again, those things become even more important. Those things that we
Amplify.
might take
Yeah.
for granted, we always want to be, all of the things that we want to do now, we should be doing anyway. But it just becomes more critical at a time like this.
Yes.
Authentically positive,
Mhm.
authentically negative.
Well, I loved his statement that you can't moan and lead at the same time.
I love that.
I wrote that down on my sheet. I'm like, that's true and worth remembering, and possibly sometimes sharing that idea with other people.
Mhm.
I loved it too. I have moan in big letters.
Yeah.
I love it.
You can do one or the other, but you can't do both.
Mhm.
Moan or lead, take your pick.
So, how do we define what constitutes a crisis and why? What were your thoughts on that one?
Ooh,
Well, it's the unknown can be just the unknown can be a crisis of a certain situation,
Mhm.
a change in a situation, or change in the norm.
Mhm.
That's pretty drastic change.
I think the dynamics are interesting because we all have challenges. And just because we have a challenge, and some people make a challenge a crisis,
True.
So I
That
think
is true, Karen, because we all know people who live in crisis mode all the time, right? That's just their life. They live like that.
I just
And
did a live with my team on it today because I had people, complain, and I'm like, you know what, you guys, let me tell you all the people we have that have over 10,000 in sales this month. So,
Mm-hmm. So back to the question, how do you define what constitutes a crisis and why?
I think that's hard.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Life-threatening, something that's life-threatening.
Okay, life-threatening could be a change, like Candy said. Could be a change that was unexpected, like what happened here.
I think it's when you feel like the rug's been pulled out from under you,
Mhm.
something that just really just comes at you and you're not prepared for it.
There was no plan for this, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Some people, everything seems like a crisis to them. Would you agree?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the
And-
hardest thing to do. That's one of the hardest things I think as a leader to deal with.
So how do you deal with that when someone is talking about something that is a crisis in their world, yet you know of other people on your team who have way more, way bigger challenges in their lives? How do you deal with that and be sensitive?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because you do have to acknowledge it. And
Mm-hmm.
when John was talking about all of the other crises that we've gone through, they didn't feel like this to me. 9/11
I agree
didn't feel like
100%.
it.
And I've heard other people say it. Well, we had 9/11, but it was different. We had, we had the Spanish flu. None of us had the Spanish flu. I mean, it happened, it occurred. We were not trying to function as leaders during the Spanish flu. So, this is the first time, at least for me, it's literally everywhere, not only in the country, but in the world. It's affecting every single person. It's not a regional thing. It's not a weather event. That's just, okay, now it's done. We're going to recover and move on. It's really, and I don't mean this to be like a downer, oh my gosh, we're doomed because this is different. But I think trying to act as if this is not different is not doing anybody any favors. If we're like, yeah, well, we had the recession and we got through it. True, but it's not the same as that either. So we can look at the similarities and what can we learn from that. And obviously we did survive it. But I think that it can be a little sort of condescending to talk to people and act as if, well, don't worry about it. It'll be fine because we had this, and this happened and we came through it. And it is encouraging to know that one way or another, we come through it. I mean, we're going to come, the majority of us are going to come through this, but I don't also want to make it, so to the extent that that's encouraging, that's fine. When it becomes dismissive of people's concerns, it's not only unkind, it's also not very productive. So, I think a balance between, yes, we will be victorious, absolutely. But let's not be too flippant, about the idea that, well, we came through 9/11, we'll come through this too. Yeah, but still different.
I kind of look at it like, when, Katrina hit, and some of the big storms, like the directors in those areas, that was a crisis for them. And I do think it's similar for them. And I think that, associating and learning from their experience, I think sometimes helps us be prepared.
Sure. But again, if you look at, and I know, Stephanie, I don't think that you were doing this event as a Pampered Chef thing. As it happens, those of us on right now are. So, to the extent that we have that in common, obviously other people will be watching the replay. But, for example, I think all of our teams are all over the country. So if I have a weather event in my area, no matter how extreme it is, a lot of my team is not right here. So they're still kind of carrying on because they're not affected in the same way. So even if a leader is in the thick of it, it still is not literally every single individual. And not only, the same thing with again, in the Pampered Chef example, our customers, I might be, in a place that had this big blizzard, but I might have hosts all over the country that are fine. They're not affected by it at all. So from the standpoint of stability of my business, it's not everyone. Where again, this is everybody, is being touched. Some certainly in bigger ways than others, or more sort of immediate effects and that sort of thing. But it still is.
I think the point that, and I don't know for sure, but I think the point that John was trying to make in sharing all of the other things that have happened is that, yes, this is new and different than any of those. And they're not the exact same, but they were crises in some places. And so what did we do to respond to those crises? And what did we learn as leaders from responding to those crises? I mean, just for example, being in Nashville and having the flood in 2010 here was horrible, but you don't live in Nashville, you live outside of Nashville. So it may not have affected you as much as somebody who lived 10 minutes from downtown, so it just depends on, like you said, where you live and what you're dealing with and everything.
Right. And I don't mean that to say that those things, and I'm not like putting it on him like he was wrong, because he even said, I know those were different, but just in general, sometimes, you hear from some people, this is not that big of a deal. It's gonna, it's just gonna pass.
But I do think that everybody has a different experience, and there are people whose lives are going on, You know, they worked
Definitely.
from home. They work, you know, even not just
Right.
direct salespeople, but
Right.
you're
Yeah.
used to working from home.
Mhm.
And, you know, I was even telling my husband that, you know, I was watching like, you know, New York, you know, where they have masks and everything on. And I live in a little country, you know, a little, whereas we don't, you know, we got one person in 5 counties, you know, that has,
Mhm.
so it's like, it's
Right.
a different
Mhm.
experience for
It
me,
definitely is. Yeah.
you know? So I
Yeah.
think that that's where we, in order to be sensitive to
Yes.
some people, it's going to hit harder. Some people, it's not going to get harder. But
Yes.
when we're talking with people, a lot of times we know what their story is.
Mhm.
And we know if they tend to make mountains out of molehills, if you will.
Yeah, definitely. And I think from a leader standpoint, and I'm sorry, Stephanie, this is not going to the defining a crisis really, so I kind of got off a little bit, but you know, to Karen's point, they're looking at a bigger picture and trying to expand that beyond, you know, the right now, because it is affecting people differently in different places. And also, you know, sharing, like, you know, because of some people that I know that you guys, so for example, on our, you know, director group on Facebook, you got people sharing all kinds of stories of things they're doing that are working really well. My team doesn't see that unless I take it to them, which I've been doing, and really sharing, oh gosh, listen to this story, listen to this creative way this person's handling it, because it's not just a matter of anything I'm doing, which, you know, but there are just either people within our team, you know, or like, you know, for example, there are still bookings out there. Yes, there are people that are, you know, laid off, that are feeling really uncertain, that don't want to do business. But there are also people, you know, my $1,500 show I'm closing today. There are people buying Pampered Chef stuff, you know. Now I also have, you know, another person who had like one order on her show, but you know what? That happens all the time. So we can't assume that those things, but again, I think people can get really focused and just in general on what's happening with them, to the extent that it does feel overwhelming. And yes, it's a personal thing we're all experiencing personally, but if we can look a little bit outside of that, and as leaders, I think that's one of our roles, is to help them to look outside of their immediate circumstances and their immediate struggles, to see what's happening elsewhere, some solutions that are coming from other places,
Right.
some encouragement, you know, that they can get. Not that
Right.
what they're doing doesn't matter, but how can I help by sharing some of this bigger picture information?
I think you hit on something that's really pertinent, Jill, and that's that whether it's a pandemic or any situation that people would define as a crisis,
Mhm.
to help them help themselves in identifying solutions,
Mhm.
right?
Right,
To help
right.
them help themselves in
Mhm.
identifying solutions.
Right.
And that's one of the things a leader does, because we can't fix it for anyone.
Mhm.
We can't make it better, but we can help them identify solutions or how to cope,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
So I know a lot of you have experienced leading during a time of crisis. So what's a lesson that you can share with the group that you've learned from leading through crisis in the past?
Sharing success stories,
Mhm.
reassuring.
And not just our own, but others. Because I think sometimes people look at you and they're like, well, that's easy for you because fill in the blank. You've been doing this a long time, or you have lots of, you know, contacts, or you have whatever it is. But letting them know that there are, you know, people in all different places geographically, and places in their life and in their business that are finding these solutions that might feel relevant to them.
Right.
Mhm.
Second party
So-
stories are important. I mean, we know that they sell, and that's what we're trying to really sell a hope.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And that's the word I was hoping would come out, is hope.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're really wanting to give people, is hope and encouragement, right?
Mm-hmm.
By doing that, by sharing those success stories. That's the motive behind it, is giving people hope and encouragement. So providing hope and encouragement as a leader is a lesson that you guys have learned
Mm-hmm.
from past experiences. Anything else come out?
Well, I lived through Y2K at a hospital, and I happened to be the chair of the Y2K committee.
Wow.
Oh my God, it was incredible, and I guess because we had to do all this preparation and write policies and procedures and how we were going to handle everything if everything went to hell. and and had to keep all these records and files and all everything. We were like, if the water failed, how we were going to get water to the hospital and what we were going to do to take care of the patients in different situations and all this kind of stuff. But bottom line is preparation and good systems of how you will behave when something unexpected happens. And I guess that's true not only Y2K, but I mean, in a hospital in general, we have, I mean, even with the computer systems now, you have, when the computer goes down, you go back, you have policies to go back to a paper system, which freaks people out. But I mean, it's the preparation and the thought process of knowing what you would do if in fact something untold happened, because we all can be hit by weather problems or all hit by something that will cause disruption in what we routinely do. I think so. I think planning, even though you can't necessarily plan for something totally specific like a Y2K instance, but I think just planning and thinking about what could happen and planning for the worst but hoping for the best, I guess, is what I'm getting down to. I think that reassures people if you know there's things you can do and thought ahead of time of what you can do when things happen.
Excellent.
So what sort of planning, which that makes total sense, and Candace, sounds like you did a fabulous job and hopefully didn't experience any difficulty.
No, we had a
but
very
you were ready
boring
because you didn't know. And there are things like that though, which you had the advantage of anticipating the possibility of this problem. So you kind of knew, we need to plan for water, we need to plan for this or that. It's sort of like every year when bad weather comes around and people, especially who are in those places, might say, what's our plan for, the snow that's inevitably going to come? Well, I'm going to talk to my host ahead of time about this is our backup plan, right? So some things, it's a challenge and can even be a crisis, but we had some heads up. We knew Y2K, that literal date was changing and might bring with it this problem, so we're going to plan for it. So when you kind of have something come up unexpectedly, like the situation we're in now, I mean, it's a little bit different, I guess, is what I'm saying. So some of the systems that we have in place certainly are helpful. Some, in my case at least, gives you a pretty glaring idea of where you might be lacking some of that. And you're going, and again, it magnifies that stuff that's not ideal and it's not anything like critical, but you're like, oh yeah, that would be handy. On the other hand, I go, this is a good time to come up with that or implement it or develop it or whatever it might be. But just didn't know with that. Like, so if we had known 3 months ago where we were going to be today, I mean, what do you guys think? Would you have done something differently to plan for that possibility? I don't know. Just curious.
I don't know that I would have done anything different, but I think, what was I going to say? I think John Maxwell said something about crisis forces us to do something that we wouldn't have ever done before, ever even considered doing. So it's almost like you have to think out of the box and think of alternatives. So because it forces you to do something that you wouldn't have normally done.
Because what you were normally doing that was working fine now doesn't apply anymore or in the same way. So that makes sense. Yeah.
Right. Like if you're doing cooking shows, in-home cooking shows, and all of a sudden you can't do those anymore, you've got to figure out, well, how am I going to keep that show on my books and still satisfy the hostess with a live cooking show, basically, or something to that extent. It's an alternative.
Yeah.
Yes. He mentions as a leader, we have to be flexible. And he mentions one of his newest books, Leader Shift, and how you move from plan A to plan B. And sometimes you need plan C and plan D, because I think that's the thing about all of this is it just felt like there was no heads up, and it feels more out of control, I think, for everyone because of that. because there were, wasn't like Y2K or we know this could happen or whatever.
Mhm.
This was not even on anybody's radar.
Right.
And I think that's why, people are more challenged by it, But you're right, Jill. It does make you look at your systems and go, okay, where are the gaps and where do I need to fill in, and how can I think differently, and how can I think outside of the box to reach customers in a different way than maybe I've done in the past. Right?
Yeah. Right.
Sally?
And from a leader standpoint, to then, transfer that to other people and give that both an example of what I'm doing, but also that encouragement, the hope, like you mentioned, and
yes,
kind of bring them along with as well.
I went through a personal crisis 5 years ago because we had a granddaughter that was born brain damaged. And Jada's 5 years old. She uses a communication device. She's tube fed. She's nonverbal. But, at the time, it was that the rug gets pulled out from under you. And I had to continue to do what I was doing. I could take a breath, but I had a spring kickoff that weekend here in town. Gene Jonas came in for. I had a retreat 3 weeks later for my directors that was coming up. And even though life was just, unbelievably frightening, and it was a crisis, but I found at that point that I needed, you need to lean on other people, and you don't have to do this yourself. And that collaboration is important. And Cindy Johnson did her retreat 2 weeks before mine, and she just packaged everything up and sent it to me, so I didn't have to worry about it. And, I still functioned through that, but it had a lot to do with reaching out to other people for help. And I think that, you look at this and you see all of the governors pulling together, and they're all leaders, and some of them are doing an awesome job and some of them are way lagging behind, but they're reaching to, the smart ones are reaching to each other to help find solutions. And I think that this is what we're doing here. And I think it's important for us to know that we're not alone in whatever crisis comes. Know that you're vulnerable and you have other people who, like did a director call. I wasn't sure what I was even going to say, but they carried the whole thing because they all had ideas and thoughts. And so, as he says, together we're way better than one of us. And so I think we have to remember that in a crisis too.
Good point, Sally. So what do you think makes a crisis seem so urgent?
You don't know what to do.
Maybe that sense that you should be doing something, but you don't know what to do. But you should, the feeling of, that unknown. And I think one of the things, and that is particular applies to this, not that it's the only time that would happen, is that uncertainty of sort of when is it going to be over? Again, it's not like a snowstorm that it comes and it does its thing and it moves on and then you're done. And now you're like, I don't know, is it a week? Is it a month? Is it 6 months? What are we, so that, in a way makes it feel like it could drag out, but definitely creates some urgency to like, gosh, I got to get on top of this. Not that it's urgency that I can fix the problem, the external stuff, but I need to do something to do something.
And we have to do something personally, but then we have to teach our people to do something as well.
Right.
And what they need to do, right? Candy, go ahead.
Well, I think we all feel an urgency to have the answers, know what to do, and so that we can act on it and help others act on the same solutions or ideas. And slowing that process down or not feeling urgent about it, I think we created our own pressure on ourselves by putting that pressure on us to have the answers and to function and continue to function. So,
and I think it's an inherent part of leadership, and John talks about this, and I think we all get it, that, as a leader, one of the whole points of it is that there are other people involved. This is not just me. I could, if I wanted to, just be like, I'm just going to take some time off and not worry about it. But I can't. I don't want to do that for my personal business anyway, but I can't do that and leave my team stranded. And when we had one of our leader meetings that we've had since this happened was really a lot about just, we need to show up. We need to be there even more than we might have otherwise. We need to have a presence in our teams. We need to be having that connection with them, because as much as we're floundering, you look at the people who are leaders, we have experience, we have established businesses, we have a lot of stability that a lot of our teams don't have. So if this is difficult for us, how much more difficult is it for somebody who didn't have that to begin with? They might be brand new. They might have started a month ago and they're floundering, or, there are a lot of different places that they are. And so, that urgency is not, I would say not only is it not just for me personally, but it's even less for me personally than feeling a responsibility and a desire to show up for other people, because they need to have somebody that they can say is, I don't want to say steering the ship. Not sure I can say that I'm totally steering it, but is at least, up there talking and sharing information and encouraging, and having that presence, so that, it's sort of like what we get from Pampered Chef Home Office, which has been just invaluable. The way they've been handling this. Literally the things they're doing, but also the way they're doing it and the presence that they have. And they have really ramped up their communication with us. And, that has been, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but to me, that's been huge. Just in that feeling of confidence and stability, and that they are on it. And so on a smaller scale, when we're doing that with our teams, it's just as important and powerful. And that creates that urgency to be, to show up and to have something to offer and some guidance and some support to give.
That's
well, I think
Pampered
Chef has been great, and I think they have prompted us as leaders to show the same sense of responsibility to our teams and to show up for our teams. And they've because they have, it's been easier for us to do the same thing and impart the same information and support.
Mm-hmm.
Karen, you were going to say something?
I learned a long time ago that I don't have to have all the answers. I just have to be there to support them. And I said this today, that I'm here. My job is to help you find reasons to succeed and not give you a place to find excuses to fail. And so we can put pressure on ourselves. And I know that there's a long time I thought I had to be the be all and end all, but that's no more. They have the answers. We all have the answers together.
And who did John say we need to put first? Do you remember?
People.
Mm-hmm.
So right now, as leaders, we need to remember we have to put our people first. We have to serve them. We have to love on them. We have to provide hope and encouragement, success stories like you shared earlier, Karen. We have to put the people first, because our role is to help all of them get better because of the crisis.
Mm-hmm. And but this might be a little bit off topic, but I think one of the biggest challenges we have are, and this is always true, the people who aren't paying attention, the people we're losing because they think it's doomsday or whatever. Even just on a regular day basis, that's, it's just, it's kind of losing it's the sad thing is when you see people with potential who aren't doing anything,
What could you do to combat that, do you think, Karen? Or anybody?
Go back to their goals. Go back to their goals.
Mm-hmm. And don't sometimes people just need to be heard? Sometimes people just need to have a safe place to express how they feel about things, and then turn it to So what do you think you could do about it? Or what do you think are some solutions, right? Sometimes they just need to vent, and we can be that listening ear. Candy knows because I did this with her, but I reached out to several different leaders on our team in different ways, mostly on Marco Polo the first time, and said, I just want to check in with you. I want to see how you're doing, how you're feeling emotionally, what's going through your head right now. And it was amazing, the responses, when you put the people first, right? When you put the people first and you check in with them, they'll start to tell you what's really their biggest fears. And I've asked, what's your biggest fear? I had a coaching session earlier. What are your biggest fears right now? There's nothing wrong with asking that question, because we have to acknowledge that everybody's having them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so that just validates for them that they're normal and that they have fears. Okay, so what can you do differently? Because we can either feed the fear or we can feed faith, one of the two. Those are the two choices we have. So I asked this team member, when she told me what her fears were, which were her income being gone, which I think is a lot of people, I don't care what industry you're in, that their income is going to be gone. And that was one of her fears. And then her second fear was health. And I asked her, I said, what can you do when those fears start to overtake? What are some solutions that you have that will feed your faith and not your fear? And she told me. So she helped find her own solutions. I just had to facilitate the question, right? To help her find those. So now she has basically, a plan in place, a coping skills plan of how to handle this when this comes up. And as leaders, all we can do is ask good questions, not provide the solution, but ask good questions to help them find their solution, right? So there's kind of this balance between this sense of urgency that we're all feeling, but also, not feeling disconnected from the situation and everything at the same time. So that was the next question, was how should a leader combat that sense of urgency without seeming disconnected? What were your thoughts about that?
I think more connection is helps. Just a lot more connection, and just checking on people. I mean, if you're thinking about caring for people and serving them, is checking on them, seeing where they are, what they're thinking, and I think that just calms everything down. Knowing that other people are there to support you helps.
One thing I did earlier, I don't know if you've probably all done this, but if you haven't, I'll throw this out. I sent a customer connection email to everyone in my database. Nothing related to business. All it was is checking in to make sure you and your family are safe. And if you need recipe ideas, here's my website. If you need to search for something that has to do with chicken, and you have a recipe of chicken in your fridge, and how do I find something that has chicken in it? This is how you do it. That's all it said. So the message that you send is, I care about people. Mm-hmm. It's not about me. It's how can I serve you? How can I help you? And I think that's something we all can do, and something we can share with our teams, right? Mm-hmm. That everyone can do, because on the other side of this, the people who pour into relationships right now are going to be remembered and are going to stand out from everyone else. Mm-hmm. Because they put the people first, right? And they'll go, oh, I remember Jill. She's that one that reached out to me and asked me if I were okay and could she help me. Mm-hmm. Now I'm loyal to her, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you may have all done that already, but just a thought.
Mm-hmm. And kind of the same thing, I think, with our teams, because if the only time we reach out to them is to say, what are you submitting? Yes. How many shows are on your calendar? That's not the same thing. I remember hearing years ago from somebody, workshop or something, that when you contact your team members in the first 2 weeks of the month, it's about them, and when you contact them at the end of the month, it's about you. And so similar, aside from timing, but if we're reaching out saying that, are you okay? What are your fears? Everything that Stephanie just described. That's really connecting with them in a helpful, useful, supportive, loving way, and not just saying, what are our numbers this month, and are you going to be submitting a show before midnight tomorrow or whatever, because that's just they're just
Right.
a number on a report,
Right.
and that's certainly not, again, it's not very nice, first of all, but it's also not going to help them. It doesn't do any of the stuff that's what we want to do in the bigger picture, from a loving standpoint, and even from a pragmatic standpoint. Stephanie, like you said, Nancy Jo Ryan said this so beautifully, a week or two ago, that, the people that are taking care of, that you take care of now are going to be your customers down the road. So you may not have, there might, I don't know about you guys, I've had hosts that have been either postponing their shows or want to book, but not right now. I've also got quite a few bookings for now. So it's certainly not everybody, but there are those people that are not comfortable now, and totally fine with that. I get it. I understand. I'm not going to try to talk somebody into something they're not comfortable with, but they're going to be there a few months down the road, whenever it is. Those are people that we can, serve however we can right now. And then it goes back to, again, Zig Ziglar, gosh, years ago when I first got into this business, we all know that, you help enough people get what they want and you get what you want. And it's, all kind of wrapped up into that approach to interacting with people. And when we can have a business that works that way, that's a pretty sweet place to be.
And John says a crisis reveals what's inside of us, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, your true character shows up when you're in
one
the midst
way or the other, good or bad.
One way or the other. Your true character will show up.
When the
right?
pressure is on.
So, how should leaders define reality in times of crisis?
Going back to what we know.
What did John recommend as far as educating ourselves? Do you remember?
To go to he suggested the WHO website and also the CDC website.
Yeah.
And stay away from media. Did you hear that loud and clear?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
I did, although I can't say I do that. I watch a lot of news. But we always did, even before this. We're big news junkies and from several different sources.
I do too, Jill. I'm a news junkie too.
So I take it with a grain of salt sometimes, you know what I mean? It's not
good.
And it doesn't stress me out. It doesn't freak me out, but I'm going to watch it.
Well, I think that what he's cautioning people against is being consumed.
Yeah.
With your entire day being wrapped up in.
Where it becomes an obsession. And
yes.
Yeah.
And then you're feeding fear again.
Yeah.
And not
and
faith.
Especially if it does make you fearful, because two people can watch the same thing, and for some people it really is terrifying and paralyzing, and for other people it's okay, there's some information, noted, move on. And it could be exactly the same thing they're watching. So kind of goes back to that. Some people everything's a crisis, some people it's more in perspective. And so there are a few different elements of that besides what's actually just on the screen.
That's true.
I think it's really hard to, I can hardly grasp this myself. And I listen and I read, and I have a son who's a nurse in Los Angeles, and I have a son who's a nurse in Columbus, Ohio. And I talk to them and I listen to them. I just can't get a sense of it. I'm trying, maybe I'm trying not to because I'm so afraid for them, but I can't get it just seems like it's just not real sometimes.
It's like I mentioned, watching people in New York who are just, or like in Detroit, that's, I'm just, you just pray for them because it's just unbelievable.
And you can feel sort of detached because you're like, well, that's not happening in my neighborhood,
It's fine. I
mean, my gosh, in my town, there are people on the street, out on the road. You'd think nothing was going on, especially now that the weather got nice. And I'm thinking, go home. What are you people doing? What do you not understand about staying home?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anything else on how we should define reality in times of crisis?
Well, I think that acknowledging it, again, not trying to just be like, oh, no big deal, everything, they're feeling the sky's falling and you're going, no, we're fine. I mean, that's such a disconnect. It's not authentic. And they're going to just kind of dismiss anything you have to say because you're clearly either in denial or clueless or whatever, but none of those are good things. So I think that acknowledging, just like any other time when you're talking to somebody, even if it's only just their own personal crisis, acknowledging the fact that it's there,
Right.
but not maybe just leaving it there, so that you take that and you put it within a context of how that's affecting either the individual you're talking to or the group or whatever, and then moving to the solution part of it. Okay, acknowledging this is what's going on. Now, what can we do about it? What are some of the things that they have thought of or could share ideas or can come up with and, be creative and, bring some different elements.
It goes back to like what Stephanie was saying, that, serving people, because what we can do is we can be a bright light. The reality is we can be the bright light. We can bring hope. We can bring encouragement. We can, people do need us, and maybe not to buy a brownie pan, but and if that is what all that happens, isn't that just awesome?
Exactly. Even if all we are is entertainment. Even if someone is just having fun watching a little Facebook Live that, one of my team members, she's always done a fair bit of Facebook Live, but she's just like doing several times a day, and she's showing her grandma's homemade noodle recipe. So if you only have this in your house, you can make your own noodles. And she just, and it's not, I don't know that it's affecting, she's not necessarily getting bookings and sales from it, but that's not the point. It's just, having that opportunity to serve, to connect, and to
it speaks volume of who you are.
Yeah,
volumes of who you are.
Yeah.
Right.
And one of my leaders I was on a coaching call with the other day, and she told me that all of this had really, she acknowledged it, which was good. It was the first step. That she was just frozen. Like she was just frozen. And I think there are other people that are experiencing the same thing. And so I said, okay, tell me a little bit more about that. What's going through your head, when you decide not to do anything? What are you telling yourself? Again, asking questions, right? And once we got through that, and I said, okay, what can you do differently to get unfrozen? And she came up with some ideas. And funny thing was, within not even an hour, she messaged me, and you could just tell by the language of her message that her whole mood had completely turned around because she acted.
Yeah.
And it was just taking action.
And she acted because she had the opportunity to work through it with you.
Yes.
For you to be that sounding board to draw her out and get her thinking beyond the frozen and paralyzed and just to doing something to move in some form. And that makes
and a lot of people are there right now. A lot of people are frozen right now. And we have to get them to just act. Just try it and act. Just here's some words. Here's what's working for me. Here are the results I'm getting. Like Karen said, here are the success stories. Just try it. See what you get. And she did. And then complete change in her mood. And so if you have people that are there, they're stuck there, I just encourage you to ask those questions to get them unstuck. Because a lot of people, what happens when they get afraid, they just freeze. They just don't do anything. They stop working completely.
Yes.
All right, so we have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to just ask you just some thoughts as we wrap up. What's the biggest lesson that you learned from this session from John or from what we talked about today? Biggest lesson you learned? Anybody want to share?
One of the biggest things I wrote down, and I pouring into relationships. I think that is just that slant on things, I think really hit home with me.
Good, Karen. Anybody else want to share?
It just
I
reminded
think
me.
it,
Oh, go ahead,
Go ahead.
Candy. Go ahead.
well, I was going to say, I think for me, it's the whole, not that I didn't know this, it's the whole people thing and putting them first, and the connection and keeping more closer connection and interaction. So it's the relationships as well.
And I think at the beginning, somebody said something about we're doing things that we should have been doing all along. And it really has encouraged me to reach out to way more people. And it just reminded me again that there are people out there that are frozen, but there are people out there in making my calls that are ready to do something, but just didn't know what the next step would be to do. So I feel like for me, it reminded me that I need to reach out. And for me, especially people who don't have a website, we've got to help them find a solution for how they're going to keep their businesses viable. So it just reminded me, connecting with more people, adding
Good.
back to them.
Good.
And I
right,
think
go ahead,
one
Jill.
of the things, well, the idea of problems being magnified and realizing that that's we can look at that and say, okay, if I'm looking at my business, my team, personal business, or overall business, things that were a little thing that was not really going very well might become a bigger factor. But also looking at, okay, so for my team members, how does that play out for them? If you've got people who, for example, were really kind of struggling anyway, everything that seemed hard to them feels even harder now. And I think that our connection with them, like we've all been talking about, the importance of that showing up and being there and being a presence as a group and individually, finding what those things are and helping them, because I think there are a lot of them, they're just going to say, forget it, never mind. It's, I'll just, people that have a really well-established, significant business are not going to just say, oh, well, guess that's the end of my business. But people who didn't have a whole lot invested anyway, either by choice or distraction or challenges, it's going to be a lot easier for them to just say, never mind. And if they had, like I said, for example, were having trouble getting bookings 2 months ago, it's not going to be any easier today. Not because there aren't still bookings.
I think having the time. I mean, I think about some of the people
other than, that's true.
who aren't working because they can't.
Right.
Now, just think, you can, success is when preparedness meets opportunity.
So take this opportunity for those that all of a sudden have that in their lap. That's very true. Yeah, but they may not be seeing, but again, that's where when we connect with them and have a chance to kind of give that perspective. And so the things, again, that if there was something challenging that feels like, well, this was hard enough before all this was going on, now it's even harder, and even if it's more in their head than anything else, we all know that that's the key anyway, is, how we're looking at it, how we perceive it, and then how we choose to respond to it. So if that has been magnified in their head, that this little problem is now an even bigger problem, they need that perspective and, leadership and kind of, little beacon of hope that can, help encourage them to move past that and find the solutions and, make it but realizing, like I said, that that's not just an issue that is a leadership thing, but a personal thing for every single person that we're talking to as well.
So I'm going to leave you with one last question. So what are 1 or 2 practical things that you can do to stay strong and steady? Any thoughts?
Sally had mentioned earlier talking about the basics, like making sure that those kind of things are covered, because I think that's such a stabilizing feeling to it for us personally, and also again with our teams, not getting so caught up in all of the everything you could possibly think of to do, or all this, well, we've got all these great ideas, and so sometimes when there are so many things to think about, you do nothing because you can't pick which one to start with or a direction like that. So when we're really looking at the things that are the basics in our business to use ourselves and to work with our teams on, that could have kind of a stabilizing and just a steadying level of comfort that feels solid.
Awesome. What else?
I'm going to focus on giving value to others by celebrating successes.
Mm,
Mm-hmm.
that's powerful.
That's important right now.
Mhm.
And that means you have to look for them.
Yes.
Good to do.
Very true. Yeah.
Anybody else? One or two practical things you can do to stay strong and steady.
Be steady. I think just be steady, be positive, and keep the ideas. Keep giving them ideas. I think that is, again, giving them action items.
Good.
Well, and I think avoiding the distractions too that we were talking about, like the news and the things that cause the fears and the anxiety levels to go higher, just to try to eliminate that or avoid it as much as possible.
Shoot, I've been at my desk 10 hours every day. I've done that. Oh my gosh.
Well, another thing too, in terms of sort of the strong and steady part of it, is realizing that this is not a flash in the pan. We don't know how long it's going to go on, but I sort of feel like initially there was the holy cow, what's going on, doing nothing. And then we, from a leadership standpoint, do all this great stuff, but keep doing it. Not just like reach out to our people or, share a bunch of ideas for a week, but keep showing up. And plan on this is, it could be a month, it could be several months. It's gonna, you know what I mean? We don't know.
6 weeks at least.
Maintain some staying power there when it comes to all the good stuff that we can do and need to keep doing. I mean, probably even beyond the crisis, frankly, because all of the stuff that we're talking about is good stuff to do anyway. But in the sort of elevated level where it might be appropriate now, at least make sure that we're not just like a big boom of leadership in the first week or two and then drop it.
We've got to be consistent.
Yeah.
It's going to make better leaders out of us for sure. And always
one way or another. Yeah.
And that's what I wanted to leave you with, was that John said a crisis brings out the best in us as a leader. It brings out the best in us. So same time tomorrow. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Stephanie.
Have a great afternoon.
Yeah.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye.